I'm Mario Martinez Jr., CEO and founder of Ingresso, and we are the creators of flymessage.io, the free personal writing assistant and text expander application. On each episode of this podcast, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you grow your sales numbers at scale. So, get your pen and paper or iPad and keyboard and start taking notes as you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Modern Selling Nation, welcome to this episode. And I am extremely excited over this particular episode. We're actually going to be taking some time to talk about integration strategies and how to bring together multiple companies together. And I've got with me today my friend, Mr. Casey George. He is the Executive Vice President of Global Sales at Qlik. And let me tell you, you're going to love the stories that we're going to be talking about today. So, Casey, my man, welcome to the show and Modern Selling Nation. Let's make sure you welcome with that like and love out there on any of the assets you're listening to this podcast on.
Thanks, Mario. Great to be here.
So, I've got this new thing that I started. I was on a podcast, literally, I think it was just a couple weeks ago. And someone said to me, so what do you call your fans out there that have been listening for 7 years, top 1.5% of all podcasts globally? And I said, listeners? And he's like, no, man, you got to go Modern Selling Nation. This is the Modern Selling Nation. So I've changed it to the Modern Selling Nation, and I'm going to start using that one. I thought it was pretty brilliant. It wasn't very hard to think about it, but I never thought about it, in fact. But Casey, do me a favor. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your background, obviously a sales leader and thought leader yourself. But if you can give us that, and then I've got a very special question that I want to ask you, which I ask all my guests.
Okay, great. Yeah. So it's funny. Someone was asking me the other day, how long have you been in the industry? And I thought about it. And I said, most sellers think in terms of quarters. So I said, this is my 108th quarter close in my career, which equates to, roughly 27 years. So 27 years in the industry. I started my career at IBM, spent 22 years there. Various leadership positions, loved my time at IBM. Left IBM again after 22 years. I did a tour of duty with Verint Systems, contact center software. Most of you, or some of you, have heard of them. That was for about 3.5 years, and I had a great opportunity to move over to Talend, which turned into Qlik pretty quick, almost 2 years ago. So it's been a journey.
So it's funny that you mentioned 108 quarters, because actually on my bio, when I give my bio to someone, it says, and at present, it's 107 quarters. So you got me by 1 quarter, man.
But it tells me we're probably the same age.
Yeah, right there. Actually, so I got started out when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
Working for a EDI 400 software company, selling EDI software on the Unix and mainframe systems. Now, that's going way back. And then we quickly, within a first year, moved to the AS400, IBM's AS400, yeah?
Started my career selling AS400, so
we're right in line with each other. And for me personally, actually, it was 4 telemarketers that were hired in that hiring round, now called SDRs, BDRs. 3 full-time, 1 part-time. I was the part-time going to school full-time at Cal. And within 6 months, I got promoted to account manager. And that year, we set, myself and our senior account executive that I worked with, we set a company record of the most amount of sales. I went to President's Club, $2.7 million, and that was a big number back then. 2.7 million, went to President's Club, and then at 21 years old, I bought my first house right here in San Francisco Bay Area. So it was like unbelievable, especially coming from my background, a poor Hispanic family. I was the first in my family to go to college, and you'll love this story. When I applied to colleges, which was just about 2.5 years before that, 3 years, almost 3 years, we only had enough money for 1 college application. It was $40 per application to submit it to a UC Berkeley, UCLA, any of those. And we had $41, and I wrote a check for $40 out of the 41, and I got into Berkeley. Go figure. So anyways, it's a great story. I'm very proud of that. It's something that we accomplished. And so I realized then that sales was my thing, and I needed to stick with it. So there you go, 107 quarters versus your 108. You outrank me. So I always ask everybody this very special question, Casey, and that is, tell us something nobody knows about you, even if they're looking at any or all of your social profiles.
It's a good question. Well, here's something. I don't know how interesting it is, but I like to collect music. So I've digitized all of my music. I collect it, every kind of genre. So I have, I think now, about 4 terabytes of music. I have a backup in the cloud, but I have 4 terabytes and growing. So I don't know how interesting that is, but I do collect music.
4 terabytes. I don't even know how I would. Who supports you? Dropbox, Box, or whatever that the cloud is. That's a lot of terabytes of music. What's your favorite genre?
I do. I am a child of the 80s, so I do like, the 80s genre, and then sometimes country and classic rock.
So my sons have been, I got Spotify, and they were fighting over Spotify. And, I only had a single user account, 4 licenses. And so one's 14 and one's 10 and a half, and they found music. And so now when they're doing their chores or they're going out and into the yard to do work, they want to listen to music. They were fighting back and forth of who's going to listen to what. So I finally got 2 accounts on Spotify, and now they can listen separately. And the other day, a song came on, and it was a very popular mainstream song. And I was like, it was a rock song. And I was like, where did you hear this from? It was an AC/DC song. And my youngest, who's 10 and a half, he goes, Malachi goes, Dad, don't you know this song? And I was like, yeah, where did you hear it from? He's like, oh, one of my buddies told me about it, and I listened to it, and I love this song. So now he's all about rock right now.
That's a great story. It's funny. I've had the exact same experience with my kids. And, I've got a 9-year-old who likes AC/DC, right? And I think back when I was her age, I'm sure I wasn't into 50s or 60s music, whatever genre my parents came from, right? But, our music has stood the test of time.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. Well, listen, today's podcast is really an exciting topic, actually. And I've been through a merger. I've multiple mergers, actually, and that was how we formed Vingresso. Originally was a 7-way company merger, small in nature in comparison to what you guys did with Qlik and Talend. But nonetheless, I had black hair back then, 8 years ago, and 1 year later, when I started Vingresso, I got the gray hair. And that was a pretty big and exciting opportunity. You guys have done something that's pretty amazing, and a lot of leaders are going through that acquisition, being challenged by some of those things, how to integrate companies together. So what I want you to do is could you do me a favor and just describe the 2 companies that you merged together, Qlik and Talend, and then talk about how sales leaders should be thinking about integration strategies and what role we play.
Yeah, for sure. So not a whole lot of people have heard of Talend with a D, data integration company born out of the Hadoop era, doing really the complex data transformation, data integration, moving your data to a particular target, typically from any source. Qlik was I'll say a legacy in the sense that it's been around for 30 plus years, very successful analytics company with a small company underneath at Attunity, which does data integration, really specialized in replication, change data capture. And so there was some conveniences between the 2 companies. We're both owned by Thoma Bravo, private equity firm. And they thought, let's put these 2 companies together. And of course, at the time you think about, well, why are we doing this? And then you understand how the market is set up. It's set up specifically around data and analytics. And it's really about transforming your data, getting value from data, get it to a target, and do some sort of analytics output that drives value and enables you to make decisions as a company, right? So if you think about it that way, you've got Qlik on one side, Talend on the other, you put them together, very little overlap in the portfolio, and quite honestly, very little overlap in the customer base. But now you've got that end-to-end journey for your customers. You can take data from any source, transform it, move it to any target, or you could take just pure data movement, take it from any source to any target, do your transformation, output on the other end. And then on top of that, we bought a small company called Kindy that does AI for unstructured data. And so we're now expanding that data journey a little bit further, and we can take it from end to end. So that was really the thought process as it relates to the market of pulling these two companies together, Talend and Qlik.
Makes sense. And of course, strategically, obviously made a lot of sense to be able to bring the two companies together. So you're now in the throes of bringing two companies together, two cultures, two sales teams, two marketing teams, and let's not talk about the two everything else. But this is definitely difficult when you bring these two organizations together. There's fear, there's trepidation, there's uncertainty about what does this mean for me and the impact. And oftentimes what we find is culture challenges that exist inside of organizations. Using my experience alone, I was formerly with Sprint. We acquired Nextel, if you remember the push-to-talk devices. And boy, the culture was completely different, right? We're talking about a West Coast base, very liberal, very fun, eccentric culture that was Nextel compared to then a Kansas City-based corporate conservative culture, like night and day differential. And when we merged together, we found all kinds of challenges. Like the sales team was like, what do you mean we're not going out to a party tonight after a kickoff? Like, what? What do you mean we have to mind our P's and Q's? Everything is very different. But nonetheless, that's just culture in general. But now we talk about sales. Talk a little bit about how you as a sales leader should be thinking about an integration strategy. Where do you begin?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's funny, speaking about cultures, right? We did have some similarities in culture, although Talend was about half the age of Qlik. And obviously over time you get, locked into your processes and different things. But the other piece is Talend was about half the size of Qlik. So you had that dynamic you were dealing with. But to answer your question, we thought about this through a couple different lenses. One was, how do we want to show up in the market? How do we want to show up in front of our customers? Is it a different persona? Could we have offerings that were similar, right, that we could bring to bear? And what we concluded was definitely we needed to move fast. As you can imagine, nothing moves at a slow pace anymore. Things are moving pretty fast, especially in the technology industry, especially in the data and analytics space, now with AI. So we knew we needed to move fast. And so what does that mean, right? Do we integrate all of our systems, all of our processes, all of our data, and then go ahead and integrate the sales team and move forward from there? Or do we take what I would say was a little bit of a risk and integrate the sales team, show up as one company, and then drag the other things behind us, right? We chose to do the latter. So it was some pretty stressful times. But what we did learn was, one, we knew we weren't going to get it perfect, right? You need to understand that right up front. If you wait till you can get it perfect, you'll never do it, right? So just understand, try to identify and anticipate as much as you can, make the move, and understand the quicker you break it, the quicker you can fix it. And I'm happy to say, and it's now been over a year, and we learned a lot, but we got about 80% right. But we quickly identified that 20% and started to move to fixing that as we were transitioning to one team. And so if I go back and look at what we accomplished in it, if I had to categorize things, it really came down to four things, right? Four, I'd like to say, pillars. One was financial, right? Make sure you have a good understanding of what good looks like from a financial perspective. You do that a couple different ways. One, obviously, work with your finance organization, your CFO, VP of finance, to understand what are the right KPIs, right? And then the other is make sure that on your team and your leadership team understands how they can contribute to those metrics. So one, I'd say, is financial metrics. The second, people and culture, right? You already touched on it. This is huge, right? You got to make sure you have the right people in place. Those people are enabled and empowered to do what they do and drive this transformation. So that's a big one. And no different than finance, you have to have a good partner in HR, right? And we do. And that has been a huge asset for us. The third, I would say, is probably enablement. And some people may say, well, that's obvious. Well, not so much. For us, we had a different skill set and a different technical depth with our sellers. So we had to get to some happy medium between the two. And that's really driven by enablement. I've got to go train what were Talend sellers on how to sell Qlik, and Qlik sellers to sell Talend. So that was a big one. And we got through that. And I've got some stories to tell there at some point where I think it would be beneficial for other people to hear and leverage. And the fourth one is around systems, right? As I mentioned earlier, you can do all that system work up front. It will take you 2-3 years to do that and then integrate the sales team. But obviously, as I said earlier, we didn't have the time to do that. So what I did figure out, though, that there were some critical elements that you can do up front in anticipation of the broader consolidation of systems. And that's really around three things. One, make sure you know who your customers are, right? And when I say that, it's what's your install base? How much ARR do they represent? Any customer sat information you have, your CRM and financial data surrounding your customers, right? The other is make sure you can pay people. That's important because now people are going to get new territories. They're going to get new comp plans, and you have two different systems. You got to make sure you can pay people, right? So that was a huge one for us, right? And then the last one I would say is it was really around enabling the team to with the appropriate tools, right? So you could have marketing tools or any sort of prospecting solutions you have out there, like yourself. Make sure that the team has those tools at their disposal so that they can be successful in their territory.
So we'll come back to this, but I do want to take the moment to tell a quick story, if it's okay with you.
Please.
And that is around tools and technology. I don't know if I told you this for all of you that are listening in, all my Modern Selling Nation, but Qlik is one of our enterprise customers. And it was because of Qlik purchasing an enterprise license for Fly Message that actually got us the last round of funding. And that was huge. It was monumental. And I'll take a moment here now to say, man, thank you, Casey, to you and the entire leadership team that have been working with us and to support us, because that was a monumental event. And we needed that opportunity to be able to continue developing and to continue growing. And as you know, software ain't cheap to develop and it takes time. I wish I could just turn over and be like, come on, we can get this done. And actually, that's one of the biggest learning lessons that I've had. I obviously have been in software before, but I never had product development, product ownership, any of those types of things prior to. And so coming from a service-based company where literally I could do anything and improve the system, the process, the delivery, etc., because it was all IP that we developed from our brains. Now to going to a SaaS company, to just sitting here like, oh, when is it going to be developed? When is it going to be ready? When is it? Come on. I can't code a lick. So I can't do any of these things. And so you really have to sit back and have some patience on this one. But nonetheless, I wanted to tell that story and say, by the way, thank you. You were talking about process, your fourth pillar, I think it was, process systems, tools, prospecting tools, one of them being Fly Message and being a good partner of ours. So thanks very much for doing that, bro.
No, thank you and congratulations. Well deserved. And we appreciate the partnership as well, Mario.
Awesome. Well, let's go back. So there were 4 things that you mentioned in terms of how a sales leader should be looking at an integration strategy. And this is what I wrote down. You talked about the financial, you called them pillars. I think earlier is the word. So a financial pillar, people and culture pillar, and you said sales enablement or go-to-market. You think you called it sales or sales enablement or sales go-to-market pillar?
Yeah, enablement and then systems. Yeah.
And then process systems and then technology. So you've got these 4 areas. I want to come back to this financial pillar first. Let's start with that. And you mentioned, you got to define what that means. You got to work with your CFO and say, what's what? What are we trying to accomplish here? And is this one of the big challenges that we see with sales versus finance is finance says, this is the number that we need to hit. This is the number that we need to grow by. And sales says, okay, I need this many people. As opposed to, it's now a partnership where someone says, hey, we're going to grow by 33%, and sales leader says that's impossible, right? Like, you got to be something more realistic. So how do you do that when you've got two massive companies with, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue? How do you tackle that issue with your CFO?
Yeah, and obviously the CEO plays a significant role there, right? And the advantage we have is, one, we have great leadership at this team. Put me aside, Mike Capone's a fantastic CEO, well-known in the industry. It is truly a joy and a pleasure to work for him. I learned so much from him every day. And then Dennis Johnson, our CFO, well-seasoned, been here, 13 years. He knows this business, this industry. And I say that because there's a level of maturity and realism in the business, right, that maybe you don't get at some other companies, right? And to your point, a CFO say we got to grow 33% in a market, maybe it grows 5%, and you've been declining for 10 years, right? We've got a very realistic objective, I would say. So to answer your question, it's really just sitting down, understanding what is really the objective. There's some trade-offs with obviously high growth. There's some trade-offs with, driving significant EBITDA margins, right? Maybe you substitute growth for margin, or, you substitute margin for growth, right? It's really finding that balance and then working with them to understand the investments that need to be made or the cost cutting that needs to be made in order for us to hit those objectives. And then you pay very close attention to it and be able to pivot, on a monthly basis. Like, here's how we're doing. Here's what I see. This is the forecast. This is the number of resources I've hired or whatever. And make sure, again, you have that open dialogue with your CFO, and there's that give and take to make sure that you've devised a flexible model, 1, 2, that you're tracking in the right direction towards that ultimate goal, whatever it is.
Going all the way down into the field, here's a story for you. When we merged together the two companies that I mentioned earlier, I had the global accounts organization, and we would sell, $30 million, $50 million contracts, right? These are big, giant contracts that we'd sell for both anything telecom related, so wireless, wireline technologies. And one of the things that I found was there was always this financial metric that people were trying to hit, and it never trickled all the way down into the field, meaning the field would say, I need this special pricing. And they would come up and the customer would say whatever the price point was for a cost per unit, and then finance would usually puke all over it, and they'd say, that's impossible, we can't do that, that's not market rate. And then now you're stuck in the middle of negotiating between two parties. And it was very challenging, and it was a very different type of culture. For example, in the company that we acquired, those individuals knew exactly what their ROIC targets were, their NPV targets, down at the deal level. Whereas in the other culture, the company that was acquiring, that stuff was never divulged down into the field. Like, you had the bean counters in the back end. No offense, any bean counters. Very important bean counters, by the way. But you had those folks who kept it all close. And so once we actually convinced finance to give us the details, help us understand, hey, customers asking for price Y, but we price it at price X. What does that impact in terms of NPV, net present value, ROIC calculations, and that we as a seller could understand that data, we began to think more objectively about negotiating with the customer. So just on that particular pillar, getting down into the weeds, how far down does the thought process around where we go, how we do it, and how we deliver, and the impact to market? And are we going, are we just trying to drive dollars and cents, knowing that we're going to impact EBITDA as an example? Like, how far down does that go into the field?
It's funny you said that. It reminds me of a story in a position I was in. It was about 10 years ago, and we had a general manager that stood up in front of all of us and said, listen, we're going to hit that EBITDA number if I'm the last one here, right? Which that's one way to communicate the message, was basically either you sell or we're just going to fire everybody. Not one I would subscribe to. But to answer your question, I think in anything you have to do, you have to communicate. You have to try to be transparent as you can, but you also have to personalize things. So if you're speaking to a rep, you need to personalize that. What does it mean to me for us to hit our targets? And therefore, what do I have to do in order for to be successful and for the company to be successful? So make that connection for them, right? You don't have to go into a ton of depth on pricing, what margins, right, headcount, all those things. You just have to boil it down to why is it important to them and how can they contribute? How can their success contribute to their overall success? And obviously, it gets a little less detailed as you go down through the organization. Obviously, if I was going to spend time with my leadership team, we get into a lot of depth, right? How many headcount, margin expectations, all those things, and then explaining to them why we are doing it. People hear, oh, you're making up 40% EBITDA margins, and they think, gosh, we're just printing money and they don't pay me enough, or they don't. The reality is, a lot of people don't realize that that money provides you an opportunity to pay down your debt, to make investments in the company, right? And we do share some of that information as appropriate so that they understand, hey, this is why we're driving towards this target, because it enables us to do this. And oh, by the way, these things are good for you, right? And good for the company. So that's what we try to do. Do you get it perfect? Do you explain it perfectly for everyone in every role? No. But you also leave the door open for them to come and ask questions so you can explain to them, if they have any questions as it relates to those targets.
And that's one of the biggest challenges I think we see is the bigger you are, the more further removed sometimes the leadership team is from the bottom of the rungs, right? And just earlier in our pregame show, you were talking about how certain reps have recently emailed you directly to give you feedback on certain things. If you did that in the old corporate Fortune 100 culture, you sent a message to the CSO or CRO, you better be, you will know with 100% certainty that your VP is going to give you a call and say, how dare you do this? What was wrong with you? So that just brings us back to our people and culture. You mentioned in this pillar, having the right people, enabling them, empowering them, and a partner in HR. Talk a little bit about this, enabling and empowering them to be able to obviously vocalize things as well as to make decisions.
Yeah, it's funny. I would say if I have one asset in my leadership skill set, and it's that I don't micromanage, right? And I think I can get away with that because I pay close attention to who I bring in to work in our organization, the leadership I bring in, the style that they represent, right? How they run their business. And, so I say that because if you hire the right leadership, they will hire the right leadership, they will hire the right people and implement the right personality, if you want to call it that, in your business, right? So that for me is key. I make sure I hire the right people. As I said, they're empowered to go do their jobs, right? So many people, so many leaders here I hear from say, gosh, I'd like to do this. I know it's the right thing to do, but I just can't. Our processes won't allow it. I don't have the authority, whatever those things are. And I'm not enabled to do that. And we try to make sure we give them that autonomy and again, empower them to go make the right decisions for their business, but ultimately hold them accountable as well, right? And most leadership wants that. I know I want that. I'm sure you do as well. So that's a big one for us. To talk about the overall culture of the organization, obviously bringing two organizations together, I don't care how alike or similar they are, they're always going to be somewhat different. And you've got to accommodate for that, right? And while, again, it won't be perfect, we try to take all of the good things from one company and the good things from the other company, bring those together and discard maybe the things that were challenging. And I think we did, maybe got 80% right, as I said. And then again, you can tweak that as you go. But at the end of the day, people want to be successful. They want to have an opportunity to be successful. So if you think about that in everything you do, and you can get every rep successful, the rest of this stuff takes care of itself. And that's the message I deliver to my team. Like, our number one job is to make sure every rep is successful. And I promise you, if you do that, the rest of the stuff takes care of itself, right? So that's the message we want to deliver, right? The last point I'll make, and this is really around working with HR, right? They are absolutely a partner in this whole process, right? I would say the hairiest part of the transformation is the people piece, right? Because you can't do it without good people. And so working with HR to make sure, one, we have the right compensation plans, we have the right incentives, we have the right people in place, that their leadership training, messaging, all of those things play out. And obviously, anytime you bring two companies together, there's going to be some changes in the resources, right? So you want to make sure you handle those things with dignity and working with your HR partners. So they play a big role in that part of the transformation. And I can tell you, just like everything else, I think, again, we probably got, 80% of that right. But if you can do that, it allows time for you to go fix those things as you go through the process. And I think we did a pretty good job of that.
Fantastic. All right. Pillar number 3, the sales enablement pillar. First off, when you merge two companies together, you got to figure out what are you offering, right? And I think you mentioned that one company had one set of products and another company had another set of products, which had no overlap. So theoretically, your customer bases between the two were probably all greenfield, right? In terms of being able to go take and cross-sell and upsell. So how do you quickly bring this to market so that you don't slow down? Or after merger and acquisition, you say, hey, for the first 6 months, it's everybody sells what they've got, and then we start slowly bringing this together. Like, what's that process look like?
So it's funny. It was almost a year to the day when we launched this last year, right? So we went to one rep who represents the entire portfolio, represents the company in their respective territories. The hardest part, and again, we learned a lot as we went through this, I just took enablement for granted, right? Everyone would get enabled. They'd have confidence. They'd go sell the full portfolio. Boy, was I wrong. I don't want to say it was a religious battle, but you had people who had grown up in a particular part of the data and analytics market, whether it be data integration or analytics, but they're both different, right? It's a different sell, different persona to sell to. And I probably underestimated how important a role enablement would play, right? So I say that we knew we had the right content. We just needed people to embrace it and therefore have the confidence to go forward in front of customers and present that value proposition. And we learned pretty quickly that it was not resonating, right? And part of it is because most people are smart. It's not a capacity issue. They have the capacity to learn this. It's just maybe a want, right? I'm pretty successful selling data integration tools. I don't need to sell analytics or vice versa. So we did something, I don't want to say it's controversial, but we basically paid people money to get enabled. And when I say that, if you looked at our sellers, we had a certain percentage that were legacy Qlik. We had a certain percentage that were legacy Talend, right? So what we did in the fourth quarter, we paid the legacy Qlik sellers 50 cents more on the dollar to sell Talend solutions. We paid the legacy Talend sellers 50 cents more on the dollar to sell Qlik solutions. So what happened? Well, what happened was everyone said, okay, I can go make more money selling the other stuff, which by the way, I know nothing about. So now I'm going to go get enabled, right? And so we saw a huge uptick in our enablement as a result of that. And I was happy to pay more to drive the business. And we had a pretty darn good Q4 in spite of all of the disruption we introduced into the company. So that was one of the key things we did that accelerated the enablement. Oh, by the way, set us up very nicely at the beginning of this year. And it has proven to be a pretty darn good year for us. And I attribute a lot of that to getting people enabled quickly.
So the old saying goes that compensation drives behavior. That's actually still true?
That's a rumor.
Got it. Well, talk for a minute about 3 or 4 things that you believe are critical for senior leaders to have or display during times of transition. And I think you've got some perspective on this. You mentioned a couple words earlier, but if you could just go through that, like what are these things that you're looking for when you've got, 2 sets of leaders and you're trying to figure out, obviously, who's going to be, leader over this and leader over that. What are you looking for? What should a CRO, CSO be looking for?
I don't think this is a surprise. You probably look for a lot of the things you think are your strengths yourself, right? And for me, I'm a big proponent of being transparent, right? Be as transparent as you can be. You have to communicate a lot. Hopefully you're over communicating in a time like this, right? The more transparent you can be, the better. Trust me, everyone appreciates that. They just want to know. And it might not be great news, right? But at least you're being transparent with them and telling them, and what does it mean to them? The second I would say is authenticity, right? As my boss says often, I won't give you the full context, but he'll say, well, Case, you are who you are, right? And that means a lot to a lot of people. But the reality is, if you're authentic, you're true to yourself, it will be very obvious in front of your team and your organization. And I think authenticity is a big one. And then the last one for me is really passion, right? When I interview people, I like to say, I'm looking for someone who has a passion for what they do, right? And if you have a passion for something, it's a lot easier for you to learn. It's a lot easier for you to be, motivated to go do good things and present value and all the things we look for out of our reps. So that one's a big one for me. I know I'm passionate about what I do. I like what I do. And therefore, it's a little bit easier for someone like myself than someone who doesn't like it, doesn't have a passion for what they do, right? So those are the three things I look for in leadership. And I like to think that I, represent those qualities as well.
I think one of the biggest ones that you just said out of the three was, you said authenticity, transparency, and passion. Oftentimes we see individuals lose the fire, and that's that passion, lose the passion to accelerate, grow, to develop, because they allow many things to get in the way. And some of them valid, and then some of them you get in your own way, I think. How do you gauge passion? How do you see passion as a leader?
It shows up and it's pretty obvious. I talk to you, Mario, every once in a while. It's obvious you have passion for what you do. I don't think you can hide it, right? No different than people who don't have passion. So I do think it's one of those qualities that just comes through the screen or comes through a conversation or any sort of engagement you have with someone. It's pretty obvious what they're passionate about. You can ask them about their family, their kids, or whatever their, golf or whatever, and you can quickly pick up on the things that they're passionate about. And I think it's an obvious thing that comes out in most engagements for most people.
No doubt. And so with that in mind, you've got over 1,000 folks in your organization, reps, leaders, personnel, supporting cast members. How do you percolate this culture of authenticity, transparency, and passion down to the individual rep level?
Yeah, it's tough. When you have 1,000 people in your organization, you obviously cannot get, personal with every one of them, right? When you have 100 people in your organization, you can know people's birthdays, what they're excited about, their likes and their passions and all those things. But with 1,000, it's tough. What I like to do is communicate in the form of town halls or any sort of group setting, right, where you can deliver the message personally and really exude the things that I'm talking about. Make sure that you're transparent. You're telling them what's going on, right? Give them an open door to come to you and obviously engage in a conversation about what's important to them. And then obviously the authenticity and the passion comes out through that process. I will tell you, going back to the leadership team and having a big organization, the most important thing we can do is put people in the right position to be successful. And I'll use a basketball analogy, right? You wouldn't take a point guard and ask them to play center, and you wouldn't take a center and ask them to play point guard, right? People have unique skills, right? To the extent you can capitalize on the specific skills for those specific people and put them in the right place, you'll be much better off as you go through this transformation. And I think that comes from the leadership team you built. It comes with the communication, the messaging you give to your team, and having them understand what are the important things I need to focus on. And first line managers probably have the biggest task in that whole equation. And so we spend a lot of time with first line managers to make sure that they are empowered and enabled to go do the right things for their reps and for the company and for their customers. So we spend a lot of time on that. But if I was to boil it down, right, those are the things I think matter the most.
Appreciate that. And thinking about these four pillars that you mentioned, again, reviewing them as the financial pillar, the people and culture pillar, the sales enablement, go-to-market pillar, and processes, systems, and tools, technology. Thinking about those four pillars and integrating two organizations, what do the sellers care most about? And then how do you motivate them to do more, even though there's a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, listen, that's a very good question. I will tell you that most leadership, sales leadership says, just give me someone who's motivated by money because that's easy, right? Give money, money drives behaviors we just talked about. I would tell you the more mature reps know that the money will follow if they're successful. And successful to them is hitting that target, right? Driving value for their clients on a consistent basis and therefore hitting their targets, and then the money follows, right? Those are the things that I think motivate most sellers. And it's no different than anyone, right? Whether they're an accountant or a lawyer, right? There's certain metrics that are established that says what is good and what is bad and what is successful and what is not, right? And for those people, typically money follows in that equation as well. So for me, it's really making sure you have a good understanding of what motivates your team. And typically it is making sure that they have the opportunity to be successful.
So compensation, but most important thing is those that are mature in the cycle, that they can see a pathway to success that will then lead to the money. That's what I think I hear you saying.
Absolutely. And, I would tell you in my experience with reps, right? Obviously they're motivated by money, but we hear all the time, hey, I want to like who I work for. If I don't like who I work for, I'm going to leave. It's not the company, it's the manager. But if you really unpack that, it's really, does that leadership provide me an opportunity to be successful, right? And I think there is some responsibility at the rep level to communicate to their management, and most do, hey, this is what's important to me. Because if the manager understands how you're motivated, trust me, it's going to be a much easier process than them guessing, right? So I think there is some responsibility. And again, most mature reps are very articulate about this and say, hey, manager, this is how I operate. This is what it means a lot to me. And this is what success looks like for me. And that way they can craft, to the extent they can, a plan of, a success plan for them to be successful.
Love it. Yeah. Good feedback there. We're coming up on time here, but I'm just thinking about, we talked a lot about the team, but there's something that still sits on top of your shoulders as the, top of the food chain in terms of the corporate sales structure, and that is hitting the financial goals and keeping the CEO and the board happy. How do you do it? What's the fastest way to hitting your financial pillar goals and keeping them out of talking to you and off your shoulders?
Listen, it's as basic as communication, right? No different than how you run your organization. You need to make sure you're communicating and managing up, right? Setting the right expectations. There's a saying that bad news doesn't travel fast. That's no different, right? When it comes to managing your CEO or the board, right? Make sure you're transparent. No different than when you're with your team, you over communicate often, right? To show, okay, here's how we're doing against these metrics. Here's what I'm seeing. I might need some help, right? To pivot. And then hopefully it's more of conversations. Hey, we're out running this plan. Here's where we could make more investment to potentially, supersize our results for the year. So again, it's really just managing up and giving them their information on a frequent basis. And I think that is what most boards, most CEOs appreciate. If they've got to come to you and ask, you're failing, right? So that's the one indicator I would say. If you're in my seat, make sure they don't ask for information. Make sure they got it at their fingertips at all times.
I love what you just said, and I'll tell a story about this. And that is, recently I had to say goodbye to our leader in the technology organization. And I had planted a new person about 3.5 months ago into the organization, with the idea that I thought this might happen, and I wonder if this person would step up to the occasion when given the opportunity. Well, the opportunity came, And I made a phone call, and he said, I told him what was going on, and he said, I want to throw my hat in the ring for this. And I said, I'm so glad you said that, because I was thinking that it would be you. Long story short, he took the role, taking on the new leadership role. Day one, I kid you not, day one, he got promoted. It happened so suddenly. And the very next day, I called him first thing in the morning. And he said, we did all of our niceties. Hey, how's it going? How's the family? Da, da, da. Okay. And he says, hey, let me give you an update. It's the first thing he says to me after all the niceties, right? After, tick. I said, okay, sounds good. He spoke for 6 minutes. And at the end of the 6 minutes, I said, wow, I only have one question. I asked my question. He answered it. And I said, I'm good. 8 minutes. We're done. I don't need, you got a handle. You understood what I was looking for. You understood what the business impacts are. You have a plan to make plan. And it's going to take you time. And I'll give you that time. And I'm going to respect that time. But anything that I wanted to think about or I would ask, you definitely nailed it. And he basically said, hey, listen, I've been watching you for 90 days. I understood exactly what you were asking for. And the previous leadership team clearly didn't understand how to manage up and how to make you feel safe that we had a command on what was important in the business from a technology side. And I was like, bro, do that again tomorrow and next week and next week after that. So I'm out of here. Go do you. And that was it. That was the conversation. And so that to me is just a great example of like the communication part, right? Understanding and predicting what is important to person A above you and making sure you address that. Any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, you just touched on it, right? It's you don't manage them, they'll manage you, and that's okay. But yeah, it's no different in my role, right? We really want to make, especially through something as disruptive as a transformation. You're combining two large companies. There's risk associated with that. You're disrupting your customers. You're disrupting your employees, right? And hopefully you're disrupting the market. But listen, there were some tense moments with our organization because we moved so fast and brought them to as very disruptive for a lot of reasons I just mentioned. And again, that's why it was so important, not just to tell them what's going on, but these are smart people, right? These are former CEOs sitting on the board. They've been there, done that. They've seen a lot more than you have. They've probably forgotten more than you know. And, soliciting their feedback. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm doing. Do you have any advice, right? It's not just about keeping them off your back because that's what they're there for. They're there to assist because they have a ton of knowledge. They have a ton of experience, and you need to tap into that. But they can't help you unless they know what's going on. So that's another reason. And I'm very fortunate. I've got an awesome board. Like I've already mentioned about Dennis and Mike, great leadership from the CFO and the CEO, but it expands beyond that with our board, and they are very engaged and they are always willing to help. And I think it's important that you communicate with them appropriately so that you can get some of those expertise back into your business.
Love it. Love it. Thank you very much. So, Casey, if an individual is listening to this and they want to connect with you, what's the best way? Is it on X? Is it LinkedIn? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best. I'm out there, Casey George, with Qlik. I try to stay off that social media stuff other than LinkedIn. That's what gets you in trouble. But anyway, you can find me on LinkedIn.
So, Modern Selling Nation, if you're going to reach out to my man, Mr. Casey George, please make sure that you send a personalized connection request that says, hey, Casey, I heard you on the Modern Selling podcast. So he knows exactly where you're coming from and give a tidbit from what you learned in this particular show. Casey, we're coming to an end here. I always ask all of my guests this ending question, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
That's a tough one because we all have favorite movies based on genre, right? So I'll just say I'll keep it within the basketball realm because I am a basketball fan. I made a reference earlier to basketball. There's a great movie from the 80s called Hoosiers. It's about an underdog high school team. Gene Hackman is the coach, and they end up winning the state championship as an underdog. It's a great story. I'm dating myself a little bit because I think it's from the mid-'80s, but I always liked that film. It's a feel-good story. It's about an underdog, and it's about winning, and I think I can relate to a lot of that here in sales.
Funny you mentioned that. This past weekend, I had a 8, 10 to 12-year-olds hanging out at my house on Friday night, my son's friends, and we watched the movie Glory Road, which was the true story about, I forget the team, Texas, I think it was, that the first NCAA basketball team, college basketball team, that had an all-black team that played in the championship round. And boy, what a great message behind that and that story is. So, so we got your movie. Appreciate you sharing that one. I'll have to watch that one myself. Hey, all of you listening in right now to the Modern Selling Nation, make sure you don't turn that dial quite yet. Listen to this final message right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. Oh, and don't forget, if you'd like to save 20 hours or more in a month and increase your productivity, go right now and download Fly Message, that's flymsg.io, for free. It's your free text expander and personal writing assistant. Hey, thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.